45 days, a month and a half of pure terror, not knowing if he'll ever make it out alive. In 2008, Jere Van Dyk, a journalist for CBS News, crossed the border into the tribal areas of Pakistan, an area no Western reporters had been able to penetrate, where al-Qaeda leaders, including Osama bin Laden, were said to be hiding. But he didn't get very far. He was captured by the Taliban, only the second American journalist kidnapped in the region, 6 years after Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl was kidnapped and beheaded by Islamic extremists. After his release, Jere set out to write his chilling account of being captured and imprisoned. And Jere Van Dyk joins me now to talk about his new book. Jere, we used to work together a lot. I can't tell you how great it is just to see you safe and sound.
Thank you so much, Meg. It's so good to see you again here.
So let me set this up a little bit for people, because in 2007 you signed this book deal to write about the areas between the borders between Afghanistan and Pakistan. This is an area you know very well. You've been traveling there since the 1980s. But what were you trying to uncover this time?
What I was trying to do was drawing on my contacts from the 1980s, because I knew the Mujahideen leaders who are now up in the mountains, the Taliban leaders fighting the Americans. I was attempting, using my old contacts, the old network, to penetrate this area, to go into the tribal areas, to find out who the Taliban really are, who is backing him, and maybe, just maybe, using these contacts, find out about the al-Qaeda leadership.
And you were looking for bin Laden, weren't you?
I was indirectly looking for bin Laden. I was trying to find a man named Haqqani, who runs the most powerful network along the border today. I lived with him in the mountains in Paktia province in Afghanistan in the 1980s. I knew him, I knew his people. I was told that I could get to him. I was dressed like a Pashtun. I knew some of the language. I knew how to dress, how to act, how to disappear almost into that culture. I had been living along that border for almost 2 years, off and on. I thought, now, just maybe, this one leader who said he would take me deep into the tribal areas, I could find out all about the Taliban, was captured in the mountains.
So you knew there was a risk, you knew there was a huge risk. So when you were captured, were you surprised? You put so much effort into disguising yourself and melting into the culture.
That's the most interesting point of all right there. I was shocked because I was prudent, even though, yes, in retrospect, it seems almost suicidal. I was very prudent in what I was doing. I knew that the tribal culture of the Pashtuns required that they protect me. They protected me. They saved my life 3 times in the 1980s. I had been with the Taliban already 4 times along the border. Each time they kept their word. They protected me. This time, however, I was betrayed when those 12 men came running down the mountains and those rocket-propelled grenade launchers were pointed right at me 3 feet away. I was shocked, frustrated, scared, and knew I was
Did you think
dead.
This was it? Did you think this was dead? I'm not going to survive this.
I'm not going to survive this at all, no.
Tell me about the conditions you endured for 45 days.
What happened was that they took us deeper into the mountains, they blindfolded me, separated me from the others, and then they took us far up into the mountains, into a dark room, 45 days in this room. We could not see across the room. It was a little farther from where you and I are right now. Across from that, I couldn't see. We were allowed out 3 minutes at night. There was dirt floor. I looked around for blood on the walls, wondering what kind of room this was. There were chains on the floor, straw roof. Said I had to convert or die. My interpreter, I felt, went against me. He stopped in the end in really interpreting for me. 2 of my bodyguards, I found out, betrayed me. I became increasingly alone. I was certain, I had 2 very intense times of interrogation. I was certain that I would not get out. I would spend days lying in my cot wondering if I would rather be beheaded or shot, how I would like to die.
How do you digest that day after day? Wondering, those are my options. How do you mentally survive that?
You change. Everything changed very slowly. It started at the very beginning when one of my bodyguards, before they betrayed me, said when the jailers came in, if they start to torture us or kill us, we have to kill them. And so what I never wanted to kill anybody in my life, and I realized that I had to join them and either kill or be killed, and it became increasingly darker. So when you get in that room and you live in that world, gradually everything else, the life that I knew in the past, disappeared. And in the end, I found that I had to find some solace, and the only thing I could turn to was, I grew up in a religious environment as a boy, was because they said, you may pray on your own in the end. So the only solace I found in this extremely dark world was, I couldn't turn to anybody else for help, so I started to pray on my own.
But you also expressed an interest to convert to Islam, and ultimately that probably saved your life, right?
had, in the 1980s, I was very impressed by these men who had nothing. They'd bow down in the dirt before God, and it was similar to this very conservative religious environment in which I grew up. So I was very interested in Islam. I was curious about it, wondered, what did this hold something for me? I looked at it, I found no, absolutely not. This was not for me. It was tyranny.
But it saved your life, ultimately.
Ultimately, to a degree, yes, it did. In the end, how did I get out? Why was I not?
Let's talk about that, because the captors basically, they wanted to trade you for some prisoners in Guantanamo. They wanted at least $1 million. Did you ever find out what happened and how you were released? What went down?
To this day, I don't know the truth. I'm haunted really by it. The FBI, which I found out is in charge of all kidnappings of Americans in the world, told me, when I asked them about a predator that was overhead for about 3 weeks, to this day, I don't know if that predator was there looking for me or it was there to kill the Taliban that kept coming and going, because I was in a Taliban way station. They would pass through there on the way to Afghanistan. He said, the main FBI agent involved in my case on the ground said, we brought all assets into play. I found out later that one of my main contacts had brought, who was in Kabul, who had set this up, a member of parliament, had called the Taliban leader to his house and said, do not harm Jere and save him and release him. But still, I've heard so many different stories. To this day, I don't know why I was not, because my Taliban leader said to me, the day I was released, or the day that they began the release process, congratulations on escaping death.
They also said to you, and I want to read this quote from your book, we are going to be watching to see if you become Muslim, and we will be waiting to hear what you say about us. That had to be terrifying. You're free, but they're going to be watching you.
When I arrived back in New York and the FBI escorted me back, and I got off the plane, other FBI agents and other plainclothes people met me at the flight. We walked through customs. I was holding my pants up. I'd lost so much weight. Took me into a room, and one man said, welcome home, Jere, you're safe, you're safe. And then another FBI agent across the table said, we would like you to, when you get home, which means they'd already been in the apartment trying to do what they can to find me, that you will find 3 messages from the Taliban.
What did they say to you?
We would like you to tell us what those messages mean, and if you recognize those voices. And essentially what they said was, hello, Mr. Jere. Hello, Mr. Jere. We're here. And I've been receiving phone calls since then.
When you first returned, I talked to you briefly, and you told me that this was such a dark time for you. You could barely talk about it. Here we are. Have you come to peace? Have you come to terms with this a little bit? How do you move from morning to afternoon to the evening knowing you may be being watched?
You think about it, you cannot live in a dark world. When you and I talked after I got back and I had to keep quiet for so long, lives were at stake, it was so hard because I felt so isolated, separate from everyone else, based upon what I had gone through and the fact that I could not talk, and I was worried about my family. The fact that members of my family were worried about their children. The Taliban just didn't call me. I had a gun to my head. I had to get up phone numbers. They had my family's numbers too. Yeah, you worry about it.
How are they doing?
Much better now, thank you, much better.
Jere, if there's one thing you want people to walk away with after reading this book, what is it?
The Taliban, in the end, didn't kill me. They kept their word. I feel that the Taliban will kill any American soldier, any foreigner, anybody in their midst. They're trying to create in their own minds a certain type of government on their land. They told me that not a shot would be fired in Afghanistan without the backing of Pakistan. I came away firmly believing that Pakistan is backing the Taliban. But they also said, or they never said, let me put it this way, that they would come here. They said Al-Qaeda has an international agenda. I also know, based upon my experience in the 1980s with the Mujahideen and now the Taliban will never give in. There's no difference between them before and the Taliban today. The only difference is in the 1980s they wore sandals. Today they wear running shoes.
It's a chilling account, Jere. It's so great to see you back, safe and sound. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us.
So good to see you, Meg.
All right, Jere, thanks a lot. Again, Jere's book is called Captive, My Time as a Prisoner of the Taliban.